By my official clock, it's now 7:30, so let me call to order the December 7 work session of Swarthmore Borough Council. I'm glad to see such a well-attended session. We've got a very long and interesting agenda this evening, and I'm glad to see that everybody is here. For our first item of business, you know, we've had this Aging in Place task force that has worked very hard on a broad range of issues over the past year, and they're here to report to us their findings and recommendations. In summary form, there's a very extensive and very good report. I guess it's now up on the,
it is on the
website, so every member of council, I'm sure, has perused it and will dig into it in greater detail next year as we, or I should say you, roll up your sleeves and get to work on these recommendations. But without any further ado, other than to add my thanks, let me recognize Ann Torgros, the chair of the...
You appointed us, and I think we are all much better able to age in place. We've learned so much. The process that we went through was to look at what other communities had done. We didn't want to, reinvent the wheel. And first thing we did was use the AARP Livable Community Survey and took the major categories and saw how well we were doing in Swarthmore. Health, housing, planning, zoning, social engagement, and transportation mobility. We then thought, and we were doing fine, not as well as we could, obviously. We then decided to break up into subcommittees using those categories. And we kind of agreed on a process to go forward. One was, first we would do some research, so we kind of thought we would know who we wanted to talk to about this. And then we held public forums, inviting people from the county, other places in each of those topics to help inform us, and it was open to the public, to help inform the public too about these major categories. And after we'd gone through this and come up with various recommendations, thanks Jane, we stepped back and said, are some key findings here that we've all come to find from having gone through this process. And in fact, there were some. Now first let me tell you, the mission of the task force basically is to improve the quality of life and reduce barriers faced by residents of Swarthmore who desire to remain in the borough throughout their lives, resulting in a community enriched by the contributions of all ages. These are the task force members, and Elizabeth Knapp was our liaison from this body, and Jane was a wonderful help throughout the process. And Tim came to many of the meetings. As I said, we stepped back after we went through this process and found some key things that we all agreed that we had learned from this. And the first thing is that the needs and values of people who want to age in place are really not very different from residents of all ages in Pennsylvania. They love the place, they want to continue to live in Swarthmore, they want to be able to walk to destinations, they want to reside in an active intergenerational community. So that many of the recommendations you'll see really not only help people who are older, but they also help everyone of all ages. We were kind of blown away by the number of resources that there are to assist people to age in place. And I've been doing this work for 35, 40 years, and I was amazed at how many resources there are. But unfortunately, there's no centralized way of finding out what they are. Sadly, we found a number of people who were isolated, lonely, and who really needed many of these recommendations. Some had moved into Swarthmore after their spouses died. They're living in apartments or with their children. Their children go off to work, their grandkids go off to school, and they are isolated and lonely. We found that many of the needs that we identified could be filled by volunteers. And we found a ton of people who wanted to volunteer, but we didn't have the mechanism to put them together. And so that was really a key finding. A key finding was also that there's not enough diverse, accessible, and affordable housing in Swarthmore. We have some of these really great older homes, but we really don't have a lot of housing that's really accessible for people in wheelchairs or with mobility problems. And that work needs to be done by all of us, homeowners, the businesses in Swarthmore, particularly SEPTA, to make Swarthmore more accessible and safe for people with limited mobility. So many of the resources maybe are not in Swarthmore, but they're located nearby. And that's fine if you can drive. And that's fine if you can use public transportation. But if you can't, then it's difficult to connect with those needed resources. And of course, with the baby boomers coming down the pike, this big demographic bubble, the need for these recommendations is only going to increase. So we believe that addressing the 22 recommendations the task force is making will make Swarthmore a safer and more livable community, not only for older Swarthmoreans, but for residents of all ages. So, 22 recommendations. Let's zoom through them. And obviously, we welcome a future conversation to get to them in more depth. Number one seems like kind of duh, but we're talking about not just encouraging borough residents to make concrete plans for the future, but helping them do so by holding some seminars at the library perhaps on home modifications that you can make, having them help them think about what they should be doing to make plans for their futures. Involving older adults in planning and decision-making processes. It's making sure that your commissions have older Swarthmoreans, making sure that you have someone on council who's a liaison to older Swarthmoreans, just the way Elizabeth was with us. Creating a vision statement. If you have a vision statement and when you do something you look and see whether it meets the vision, then this is not going to be a task force report that just goes on the shelf, but that hopefully that you're going to, as you govern, begin to look and see whether or not it's meeting those needs. Establish Swarthmore as an age-friendly community. There is the World Health Organization designation. Philadelphia has it. Westchester has it. ARP has a designation. And it doesn't take a lot of work. It doesn't take a lot of money. But it just puts it out there on your webpage or whatever that you foster aging in place and become an intergenerational community. Provide a full range of educational information and support services to adults, both on your website, but also we ran into a lot of seniors who were not able to use the computer. So having a library file where they can get that information. Also, I saw a wonderful clip. Carrie, I think you sent it to me. A wonderful clip about high school students teaching people who were 80, 90 years old how to use an iPad. And if you think that if you're stuck at home and you can't get out, being able to order from the co-op or being able to order through Amazon is really going to make a difference for you. We are seriously strongly recommending, that you have a one-year implementation committee to work with council on implementing some of these things. Some of the things don't require any action by council and could be implemented with this committee. Oops. Postpone.
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 Yeah.
I can see where I'm atmosphere. Council provides some small amount of money to SRA and to the town center to have non-profits help with some of these functions. We're suggesting a similar thing here, that we designate a entity, perhaps the Senior Citizens Association, give them a stipend so that they can hire someone to help do some of these things. And perhaps help give some grants to fund that person and to do some of these things. Create a volunteer-driven resource network for Swarthmore's older residents. Media has a time bank. It's wonderful. People can sign up to volunteer. They then get an hour for every hour they volunteer, which they can give away to their grandmother, or they can use it at the time when they need services. It's not costing the borough anything, and it's volunteer run.
In the social engagement area, we talked about coordinating community spaces and programs to promote intergenerational social interaction. One of the ideas that we came up with and we talked about was having a weekly Swarthmore 101 newcomer coffee in the Borough Hall that would allow people of all ages who are new to the community to come learn about Swarthmore, learn about opportunities to meet other people and to get involved with the community. We talked about looking at existing social and recreational organizations to make sure they're older adult friendly, things such as the Swarthmore Swimming Club. Is the water warm enough so that an older adult would enjoy spending time at the pool? We talked about encouraging local schools to sponsor ongoing programs or events that would foster interaction between students and older adults. We would ask the borough to give special focus to Swarthmore College and opportunities for interaction between the students and older adults in our community. For instance, someone had the idea of sponsoring a reverse lecture series where someone in the community, an older adult in the community with an area of expertise came and spoke to the students or the community about that area. And then expand opportunities for older adults to serve as and be served by community volunteers. Our 10th recommendation is to encourage synergies among local organizations to better serve older adults. And Ann had mentioned that there are a number of organizations in the community, the Schoolhouse Center, the Swarthmore Community Center, Swarthmore College, Wallingford Swarthmore Community Classes, all offer services for older adults, and some of them offer spaces and some of them offer classes, but they don't work together. And so we talked about initiating a consortium of existing local organizations to coordinate information amongst themselves and expand their programming aimed at older adults. We also talked about the Schoolhouse Center is a senior center that's in Folsom, and a lot of older adults in Swarthmore don't utilize that resource. We talked about asking the Schoolhouse Center to come and sponsor some programs in Swarthmore to not only bring services to Swarthmore older adults, but to educate Swarthmore's older adults about the opportunities at the Schoolhouse Center.
Every phase of life seems to have its own special challenges, and among the elderly, that challenge is health. If anything is going to keep you from aging in place, it's most likely to be a health problem. Elders constitute 70% of in-home accidents. Elders are overwhelmingly the victims of financial crimes, and of course, elderly represent the vast majority of our healthcare expenditures. We have a few resources in our community. We have no doctor's offices in the borough, but we have many nearby. We also have a public health officer, Dr. John Crawford, who has agreed to make himself available to us if we can use him. I think that promoting the health of elders in the borough involves bringing doctors into their homes. House calls are no longer a thing of the past. There are doctors willing to do that. Dr. Crawford has agreed to help act as a liaison between us and the larger medical community. We have very good resources nearby. The schoolhouse has been mentioned. It is a very broad, they have a broad range of activities, a lot of them health related. Fall prevention classes, blood pressure monitoring, weight loss, fitness classes, a whole bunch of things that promote health. Swarthmoreans don't use those facilities, and we think we need to encourage them to do that. We would also ask you to consider contributing to the schoolhouse. Many local communities do, but Swarthmore does not. Another important asset is COSA, the County Office of Services for the Aging. Many people believe that that agency only serves underprivileged people, and that's not so. They are available to help in many different ways. I think probably the most important is that they will gladly perform home assessment. They will send somebody, a trained professional, to your home to assess your home, to assess you, to find out what your needs and abilities are, what kind of problems exist in your home, and come up with a plan to help you correct that. That's available for free to anybody, and I don't think we use that. We would like to make people more aware of that. We have those resources. On the health side, of course, we have our police department. Sergeant Sutcliffe spoke to us at length and mentioned all of the resources that the police bring, all of the services that they're willing to provide for the borough as a whole, but the specific things that they can do to help elders. So our recommendations are to promote and support services that are already in place. We would like to have a program by which the police have access to health information about elders. If a first responder has to visit a home, we need to have a way for them to get into the home and have information available right away. So we want to work with the police to encourage programs like that, and we want to encourage people to use the programs that exist, such as COSA and the schoolhouse. And then I'll turn it over. One other thing. Many of our elders told us that an important aspect of this community is the presence of an emergency medical service. That is a source of comfort to many of our elder citizens, and we would like to encourage you to think of ways to keep that here.
So with transportation and mobility, we were looking at how to encourage connection and reduce isolation for older adults and everybody. I think these recommendations really apply to the general population. The map you see here is trying to take a lot of different information. There's a pretty detailed key, but the big red circle is a very simplistic half-mile radius from the clock at the train station. And that's defining a half-mile radius, which we think is sort of the key focus of the walkability and pedestrian recommendations. It also has to do with the transit-oriented development overlays that Carol will be talking about with the planning and zoning. So the first recommendation under transportation and mobility is to improve pedestrian connections with improvements to existing pedestrian routes and creation of new ones. We heard about the importance of the walkability here in Swarthmore as being very important, but at the same time we heard that really to do a lot of activities of daily living, such as grocery shopping, for example, people are either going to use their car if they live too far away, or they're going to go to places that are kind of cut off from them in a pedestrian manner. So for example, if people live closer to Giant, they might want to go there, but it's hard to get there on foot. So some of the specific recommendations, specifically with pedestrian accessibility, one ties into the public transportation as well, is to better connect the north and south sections of Swarthmore at the train station. We think that the SEPTA train station underpass should be made accessible. It's very difficult to get from the north to the south there because that underpass is inaccessible right now. Continue to prioritize and implement the sidewalk and curb cut improvements that have already been extensively worked on and analyzed. We just encourage that those locations that have been studied move forward. They're very important, and I actually heard from many people specifically about some of those specific locations. Cooperate with the college So cooperate with the college to reinforce connections to and from the college. We were thinking about publicizing an accessible path that might be, part of, recreational activity. It is very accessible currently. There is signage, but maybe that could be increased, or there could be some sort of a map created. Actively pursue connectivity goals with adjacent municipalities. So again, there are a lot of places just beyond Swarthmore. I always think of the Wallingford Community Arts Center as being the one that is such a great resource, but that going down Flush Mill Road and crossing that the bridge there is very dangerous. So how can we work with adjacent municipalities to make those connections better? And then provide amenities such as benches and lighting. Sometimes shade trees, I think we have a lot of trees, but lighting sometimes might be at odds with residential concerns, but how can we maybe find more of those amenities along walks and maybe specifically in that half-mile radius? The next one is increase accessibility in town center and throughout Swarthmore. This is very important. We think there are a couple of concrete measures that can be taken that might be lower hanging fruit, so to speak, maybe lower cost, and then some more infrastructural long-term type things. Improve accessibility of downtown businesses by providing portable ramp information. A lot of our inaccessible businesses are only one step up, 6 to 9 inches. Those could be handled with very inexpensive aluminum portable ramps that the stores could have inside, and combined with signage for how somebody in a wheelchair could get somebody's attention inside. It would be a great way to fix a lot of the problems very inexpensively. The other idea is for those businesses that are higher up than, let's say, 6 to 9 inches, there's some businesses that are 3 or 4 steps up with a stoop. Could we perhaps have ramps that are parallel to the sides of buildings and servicing several of those storefronts in conjunction? So the example that I think about is the parallel ramp, and we have, I think, an image of it, of the bank, the M&T Bank, and on South Chester Road. That ramp is parallel to the side of the building, and it doesn't take up the sidewalk width. Can that be done on several other storefronts right adjacent to it? Conduct periodic outreach and education programs for businesses and property owners on compliance with current accessibility laws, including the Building Code and American Disabilities Act, and provide tax credits to help offset those costs. There's a lot of laws in the books that I think are not very enforced. Create a time-based plan to complete key accessibility improvements with the businesses in an agreed-upon time period. Then throughout Swarthmore, promote accessibility by promoting the wide new sidewalks, 4 to 5 foot widths, and curb cuts with detectable warning strips. We did hear about people who park downtown and they have to go all the way around because there's no curb cut mid-block to get up from their parking spot to, let's say, Borough Hall. So we heard about wanting to have more, maybe not adjacent to every parking spot, but more mid-block curb cuts. And promote awareness of accessible design and seeking grants. Okay. The next one is promoting public transportation and accessibility. So we talked about the underpass being made accessible, work with established organizations and promote their availability. We heard about community transit extensively, and again, community transit is really available to anybody, but there's a stigma to using it, and maybe if it could be promoted more people would know that it's available to them. We also did hear about the first step of the train is very difficult for people to get on and off because it's so far from the platform. So what would be some measures to either extend the elevated platform or something that could help with getting on and off the train at that high step? The next one is improve pedestrian and driver safety. So increased crossing times and road marking for pedestrian crossings, such as the one I already mentioned at Baltimore Pike. Those are very short crossing times. Install more visible road markings in advance of key crossings. Expand the responsibilities of the sidewalk code enforcement officer to inspect the walkability of the sidewalks, the temporary signage not impeding the path, etc., shrubbery, etc. Using older driver federal guidelines, evaluate and implement key safety measures such as increasing the sizes of letters, installing overhead street markings on major roadways, and making roadway markings more visible. I think this is really important in Swarthmore. The roads are narrow and it's very difficult when cars are oncoming at night. It's very blinding, so more reflective markings would help. Evaluate walkways for lighting where safety and visibility is most needed, and update the borough's regulatory ordinances to redefine and apply clear sight triangles to road intersections. So the ability to be able to see when you're at an intersection what you're going on to is very important and sometimes difficult at a lot of intersections. Okay, so is this the last one? Yeah, this is the last one. The last one is provide vehicular transportation to key destinations within and just beyond Swarthmore. So even with all the pedestrian and driving roadway improvements, there's still going to be a population that just can't access the current public transportation and they can't drive. And that set of residents is the most isolated. They are at home and they can't get around. So we wanted to address that. Some of the ideas we had were organized, again, based on this Time Bank Media idea, and a volunteer-based driver service program. There are issues with liability, etc., but I think with that kind of organization, those things might have already been addressed in that kind of structure. We took another look at an intermunicipal shuttle service proposal that was proposed in Nether Providence. It looked to be a great proposal, wasn't funded at the time, but we think that that could be a great thing. So this would be something where there would be a preset set of destinations and maybe times. Maybe one day it would be media and the next day it might be giant, whatever it is. Also, I thought a lot about the condominiums. I'm thinking of Strathaven, thank you. They have a shuttle service that has destinations every day of the week, and so it's something that doesn't run full time. It's just a couple hours of the day. We understand that this isn't going to support a huge ridership and a point-to-point destination type thing. But is there a way that we could kind of provide? And I think it's really in the daytime, that daytime service to reduce isolation. Consider subsidizing a multi-municipal 311 taxi service for qualifying riders. Tinicum Township, for example, sponsors this type of thing for their older residents. We think that perhaps might be some other type of ride sharing service for whatever, but some kind of sponsorship for this kind of point-to-point service. And then engage with Swarthmore College to coordinate a van service for pickup based on their event schedule. So we heard from a lot of people who just can't make it up that hill. It's a barrier to get from here to there to get to all the events, and there's so many great events that happen. Could there be some sort of vehicular transportation that services those types of things?
So housing is, along with healthcare, one of the most expensive parts of growing older in Swarthmore, if not right. So I think it's okay. So we have 3 proposals in the area of housing, and these are the main parts. There are details that are in the report, and I encourage you to read those because I'm not going to go through all of them. The first one is to encourage the creation of a range of affordable housing options near downtown. In other words, within that circle that you saw on the map, the half-mile walking distance to the train station. So what that means is probably higher density housing, more townhomes, more apartment buildings within that 1/2 mile area. I knew this would happen to me too.
You keep talking out.
Okay, so the way that would be done is through zoning and planning, which Carol will talk about, and through incentives. And a lot of people were saying, I want to live in Swarthmore, but I don't want to live in my 4-bedroom home all by myself or just with my spouse. But I don't see any options, any other places to move in Swarthmore. So that's what we're proposing that we create. The next one is to provide opportunities for diverse housing options throughout Swarthmore. So not just the 1/2 mile radius, but looking at other options for people to live or continue to live either in their home or in a smaller home, but still in the borough of Swarthmore. And the main proposal here is to look at the possibility of allowing mother-in-law apartment, or there are numbers of names for these, but the official name, of course, is accessory dwelling units. And with restrictions, we feel like this could be an option that would allow people to either live in their home and have somebody, a caregiver or a renter who can help out with the finances of keeping the home going, living nearby. So, and also allowing people to convert larger homes to group home living situations and more congregate living in Swarthmore. And then finally, we would like to encourage people to look at their own homes and look at homes that are about to be built, if any, to make them more accessible from the get-go. In other words, rather than wait until you have to have a grab bar, think about putting grab bars in now, or putting a ramp up to the front door, making homes more accessible. This is not something that can be necessarily dictated, but we would like to see it encouraged. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol.
I never got one. Well, that's all right. I can talk anyhow.
About planning?
About planning and zoning. The last is not least. I would say this is really where that rubber hits the road. This is where we listen to everybody, and what they're saying is like, well, how can we implement this? And how can we implement this is through a number of methods. Linton has talked about having planning and zoning do new housing options in residential districts, those accessory dwelling units. There may be some concerns about how you implement it. There will always be, any kind of change will always have some pushback. But by having different kinds of conditions, like having them be owner occupied and making sure that residential character is maintained in each community, in each neighborhood, we can make some very fundamental changes, which is really, really very critical to have affordable options for people to stay in Swarthmore. He also mentioned something about converting. Large homes, we can have condominiums, we can have house sharing, co-housing, lots of different kinds of things, again, with conditions. Remember a few years ago, you passed an ordinance about bed and breakfast. Lots of things to consider, but it's really adds such life to your community by allowing people to have the ability to stay in their home, and having a grandparent live by, and having to see children play next door. Streamlining the review and approval process, the permitting, adding guidelines to the zoning hearing board. All of these things are really small things, but really it tells the community that you are supporting this vision of how to translate a village kind of community in everyday life. Because the impediments of planning and zoning are really very considerable, with the exception of the town center. and I would like to congratulate you for looking at the form-based zoning in terms of how you can structure a livable community. When you're talking about the town center, you've allowed mixed uses and a variety of housing types, but there's other ways that we can also promote it, and there's really kind of two different ways we can do this. One is to look at what they call an overlay zone. You don't change the zoning, but along a transit corridor, we allow some other things to happen. Maybe a little bit denser, maybe some multifamily housing, maybe those conversions, maybe by right. Those are some kind of the considerations you might think about. The other one is that you have the town center. Well, what about right outside the town center? You might consider a transition zone. Let's say I'm recommending. We are all recommending these things. It's not considering. It's working out the details. But considering a transition zone where you would have townhouses. You have townhouses on Dartmouth. You have some townhouses on Rutgers. Let's pull it all together and make it much more of a zone that's a transition from a certain residential area and having much more of a mixed use. Like it used to be in the 19th century, where there would be a tailor or a butcher in almost a residential community. If done carefully, it can make communities come alive and provide the kind of life that I think that people really want to have here. And last, and you know, as a planner, you know, we must make all of our planning documents consistent. So you've done the town center form-based zoning. How about if we consider bringing that into the residential area? That's part of the accessory dwelling unit, making sure the form of the accessory dwelling unit meets the character of the neighborhood. That's no different than what you've been doing in the town center. Subdivision ordinances brought into line, updating the master plan, all those other kinds of like little nuts and bolts things to make sure that all of your documents are working together and are consistent in terms of their definitions and all those little minor details. Those details are the things that really are important because it's a legal document and it gets translated into people's lives. So with that, my impassioned speech of planning and zoning, which is probably the most technical in a way, but really one of the most important things that you can think about.
So thank you very much for the privilege of working on this. I'd like to thank my task force members who really did an incredible job. Spent, I can't tell you how many hours. We know that Ralph and Elizabeth are leaving council, sadly. And so we are saying that we would be happy to come back to the new council and be available again to talk about these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Well, Pam, thank you. Thank you to the members of the task force. It's really a next year. I would just echo 2 points that Ann made early on that really struck me as I was listening to the presentation. One was how many of the recommendations can be done without expenditure of a tremendous amount of money, that are really things that are within the council's ability to contemplate, and many of them are really volunteer fueled, and that's a theme that we've heard a lot, including from our mayor. So these are very much within the realm of the possible. The other point that she made that really struck me is that this is just not about making Swarthmore more livable or accessible or enjoyable for senior citizens. Most of these, almost every one of these recommendations, I think has potential to make Swarthmore a better place for all of us of any age. And I think that's maybe a wonderful unintended consequence of this task force report. So again, I thank you all for your hard work and excellent end product, or at least end product of this phase, and I look forward to seeing what council does with it going forward. So thank you all again. Moving on to our busy agenda, which everyone is certainly welcome to stay for, but I know you put in.
I think this is Lindsay. Sorry, I'm trying to move this without.
Next item on the agenda is the public hearing on our 2016 budget. The public hearing consists of the opportunity for any member of the public to address council as to any aspect of the 2016 budget. If there's anyone who wishes to offer public comment, offer input during this hearing on the 2016 budget, now is the time. Please come to the microphone. Seeing no comments from the public, I'm going to declare the hearing on the 2016 budget closed. And as you know, we'll be voting on the budget resolution at our final meeting of the year 2 weeks hence. Next, let me open the public hearing on Ordinance 1072, which is our new proposed institutional zoning ordinance. If there are any members of the public who have any comments, any input at all that they wish to offer, the public hearing is now open. Please come to the microphone. Let us have your comments. Greg.
Hi, Greg Brown. Live on Swarthmore Avenue. I just wanted to note that the process by which you got this ordinance was an excellent one. We at the college appreciated having been able to see what was coming and to work on it with comments, and we really appreciate the work that's gone into this. I know this is a major undertaking for the borough. Obviously, there's not everything in this that's to the college's liking, but we really believe that this is a good way to codify so we all know our expectations would be going forward. So I just want to thank you for that to the college.
Well, we appreciate that. And for those of you who sometimes come to a borough council meeting and see a vote on an ordinance and you think, well, that's simple, they just look at this piece of paper and they say yes or no. Believe me, there's an awful lot of work for weeks and weeks and months at the committee level on all ordinances, not just zoning, but the whole range of issues that council grapples with, from budget to parking to you name it. So I appreciate those comments. Any other members of the public? Hearing none, I declare the public hearing on ordinance 1072 closed, and that ordinance as well will be voted on at our next meeting 2 weeks hence. Now let me open the floor to any public comment of any sort. Great.
Oh, I missed it with the fire call. Good evening, Council. Rick Lee, Vice President of the Fire Company. Just want to let the community know that we finished our first week of Christmas tree sales. The sales are a combination between Swarthmore and Morton Rutledge Fire Company. We do this together. We split the costs as well as the work and the proceeds, and we had a very successful weekend thanks to the wonderful weather, as well as home for the holidays. So working in synergy with that, we had a great weekend. We have 2 more weekends. We're open every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday evenings 5 to 8, Saturdays 10 to 6, and Sundays 12 to 5. So please come by. We get fresh cut trees every week. We'll be cutting more trees this week and bringing them to us for our Friday. And so we look forward to all residents stopping by to support the fire companies both in Swarthmore and Morton Rutledge. Thank you.
Rick, thanks very much, and thank you, of course, to the fire company for all of its important work for the community. Any other public comment? Hearing none, public comment is closed. Next, I don't want to race through the budget, but through the agenda, but we do have a lot on the agenda. Let me just mention the next 3 items, which are really previews of items that we approve annually at our last meeting. You've all had them circulated to you by email, and I think there have been some informal comments and corrections already, but there's our schedule of meetings for next year, the schedule of borough holidays, and the annual resolution that sets various fees, charges, and fines, as well as salaries and benefits. So I urge all members of council to study those items carefully. There are important things that we vote on. If anyone has any questions or comments now, Jane, you have a...
Oh, wait, if anybody has any questions, I have just a few. Well, let me just comments. Council meeting schedule, somebody pointed out to me that the last meeting in December will be December 19th, not December 12th. We use that as a reminder right now that our next meeting is not December 14th, but December 21st. We do advertise all of the meetings, even though sometimes the work sessions don't happen. And in this week's paper, we will have an ad already for the reorganization meeting, which is the first Monday in January.
At which our two newest members will be sworn in, but I see that as they have been for a couple of meetings, they've been observing the work of council, and their presence is welcome here.
On the schedule of fees, I just wanted to note that you'll see there were a couple of highlighted areas. One of them was a brand new section setting fines. I think David's going to talk about that a little bit more, but setting forth the fines for people who don't shovel, do not repair their sidewalks, and don't take care of their overgrown vegetation.
Dovetailing with the aging in place schedule?
Yeah, absolutely, dovetailing with that. And the budget that you've already seen actually, as I think I mentioned somewhere in the budget process, does already include more money for code enforcement. It's the going back the second and third times that we've been not so great at, and so I think people just kind of let it slide. I'm sure, as I say, Dave will discuss those and how they came up with those numbers. And then on the schedule, the only thing right now that's changed from the current year is the stormwater management plans. The fees have gone up. We have to send these to the borough engineer to review, and it's just a very expensive process. It's really just a pass-through of cost. So right now, those are the only changes from this year. The salary and benefits resolution, I think is fairly self-explanatory. No change in benefits for this year. The health plan is exactly the same as last year. The contribution required from non-uniformed employees is the same, 8%. That does not apply to uniformed employees. By contract, they do not contribute to the plan. And I think the General Government Committee will actually be looking at that plan next year to try and get the premium down a little bit. So that we can avoid the Cadillac tax that is coming in 2018. Any questions on any of those?
All right, you have them by email, and we will vote on them at our next meeting 2 weeks hence. One action item for this evening is the proposed ratification of an extension of the Redevelopment Assistance Capital Project grant. You recall that was a state grant that was received for the town center redevelopment. I guess it was mostly infrastructure for the utilities and the like. The borough is the nominal recipient of the grant, although it's essentially a pass-through to the colleges in project. Because of the timing, I guess it was a 2-year grant initially. Is that?
I'm looking over there. 2, 3, I don't remember. I don't.
It was a
Seems like
multi-year
forever,
grant.
but I don't. I want to say 2 or 3 years that council originally.
But
yeah.
there was a request that the termination date of the grant be extended 1 year from November 30th, 2015 to November 30th, 2016, and given the short time frame, I undertook to actually sign off on it, but am looking for your ratification of that action. So if there's a motion to that effect and a second.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just clarification from my own end. The request came from the college?
Yes.
Okay. And were getting this extension back from the state. But
Yes.
since we made the request, we're the ones that have to.
Exactly, but it's just an extension of time to expand.
They need time, and we need to be the person that asks.
Precisely. Got it. No other discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the action's been ratified. Next, our committee reports. Environment, Lauren.
Sure. The Environmental Advisory Council is looking for new members, and they're going to have sort of an open house on January 26th at 7:30, just kind of for whoever is interested in hearing about the EAC and what they're doing. And there'll be some announcements coming about that later on.
Do you want to just maybe mention the energy audit tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow that's pretty exciting. There's going to be an energy audit of this building tomorrow at 9, and I'll be there. And it's I didn't prepare anything, but
The county, I think, got a grant, so they're
it's a
providing
grant.
the service for...
It's a grant, so it's free for us, and it'll be great to see how our building is doing and see what recommendations there will be to help us save energy.
They've looked at street lights, traffic lights, and they'll look at both buildings. So they have all of our bills for the last 2 years, and then they'll spend about 3 hours tomorrow actually looking at the buildings and then give us some recommendations.
Great.
And that's it, yeah.
All right. Thank you. And anything else from the environment? That's my finance.
Yes, first of all, hopefully people got the amended invoices. Some urgency to get this passed tonight, so I'm going to make a motion to approve these invoices. So I just want to make sure everyone's had a chance to take a look at them before I make that motion. Yes? I'd like to make a motion to approve the open invoices for the month of December totaling $106,776.37.
Second.
Any questions, discussion? All in favor of approving the invoices, please say aye.
Aye.
They're approved.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess we just talked about the tax and fee ordinance, but I guess we have to do an authorization to advertise. So is that actual
Authorization
vote?
to advertise,
Is
yeah.
that-
Just
Okay, so
Just to
I'd
advertise, right.
like to make a motion to authorize to advertise the 2016 tax and fee ordinance that we discussed a few moments ago.
Second. Any questions, discussion? This is to approve the advertising so we can vote on the budget 2 weeks hence. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising is approved.
So the rest are all reviews of resolutions for the next meeting. So the first one is the authorization of the Borough Treasurer to collect the sanitary sewer fees. Any questions or comments on that at this moment? No? And then the next...
I would call a typo the borough manager's attention on the proposed resolution on the cost of living increase. In the 5th line, the word extend should be extent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just wanted it to be known that I had read at least.
Exactly what I was going to
The reason that's in there, by the way, if anybody wonders why we even have that in there, the State Act 600, which governs municipal pensions for police, actually caps how much of cost of living increase police officers can get over their lifetime. So all of our officers right now who are retired are actually capped. So the resolution is just making it clear that, well, it's zero anyway this year, but if it weren't zero, they wouldn't get it anyway. Doesn't explain the typo. Explain what-
That's the version though.
Trying to-
Just moving quickly to the other ones, the non-uniformed and police contribution to the pension funds, both at 5%. Any questions or comments on that? No? And then the cost of living adjustment that Jane just talked about, just to give you a quick sentence as to how we came to zero. That's basically, we're piggybacking off the government. That's what the cost of living for Social Security was. So knowing that we can't come up with a consistent way to measure that, we're piggybacking off of that, which I believe is what we did last year. So that's where that zero came from. And then finally, any questions on that? No? And then finally, the appointment of the independent auditor. Any questions on that?
Is that something that goes to a bid, Michael? Who is our auditor and why?
It's not required to be bid, but every 4, 5, 6 years, we tend to do a request for proposal.
Okay.
And it is Beaverville.
It's right now, it's Barbara King Thornton,
Oh,
and we
sorry.
actually switched
Okay.
from last time, and this is their third year.
I know it was like the tree service, like there's only one person that wants to do it.
No, we got more. No,
And we actually intentionally
It's
switch
encouraging to
periodically
switch
so that
everyone.
it's not
Yeah.
They're not
the
getting,
same person auditing.
yeah, you're not getting too cozy and comfortable.
Right.
so.
Right, so I think Barbara King was the low last time, but you're not required, it's not like a construction bid. Council could pick the high bidder if they wanted to. So.
And then finally, we are losing one of our members of the pension committee, so that's an opening that we'll be looking to fill. So any recommendations or thoughts would be welcomed. And that's all.
All right, thank you. David, General Government.
Thank you, Ralph. As Jane mentioned, we did meet last month. I guess as a point of parliamentary procedures, Jane, can I make a motion to advertise?
You can. Normally, we wouldn't have enough time, but it's just a single advertising, so just like we could put it in the paper tomorrow, it'll be on Friday, and it only needs one.
It has
ad.
been emailed to everyone. Has everyone read it? Does anyone have questions? Would anyone like, well, let me make I'll motion to advertise.
I'll second that.
All right, the motion is to advertise the ordinance with procedures for levying fines for various violations of ordinances. Questions, discussions? David, anything you want to point out?
Yeah, now, since we're talking about it, we're basically rolling the clearing the sidewalks for snow in with clearing them for vegetation or responding to when the borough says you need to repair your sidewalks. So we wanted to kind of simplify it, create some uniformity to all of them. And then, as Jane alluded to, next year we're going to put a little money into the budget so that we can then enforce it. So you have one thing to write the law, and it's another thing to then go enforce the law. So just very quick summary for public or for those who haven't read it. This isn't a financially driven thing for the borough. We're trying to just get people to do what they should do as citizens. So the first offense is still a warning, whether that's sidewalks, for vegetation or for snow. Second offense would move to $50. Third offense would be $150. This is specific to street and sidewalk obstruction. For snow and ice, first offense would be $75, and second offense would be $150.
Can we just clarify, we don't usually do a warning for snow, we usually go right to.
We would go right to a fine. So, this is what came out of our committee, and we discussed it fairly at length. But it was only the three of us, so if there are any changes that council itself would like to make prior to this going to a vote, we certainly have time. The motion tonight is just for advertising.
If I could, for a moment, speak in support of this. I am 78. I've been aging in place in this town for 46 years. I don't know that people can understand. Fortunately, I don't fear this as much as I should. What it means to an older person to fall. And to fall suddenly and hardly. I had that experience on ice that I didn't see. Fortunately, for all concerned, I was on my own property at the time. But in an instant, you are on the ground. It may be a blessing that you didn't anticipate it, so you don't put down a hand or an arm to break your fall. Fortunately, I don't think I suffer from osteoporosis. I did not break anything, but it took me at least 7 weeks. Fell on my side, I crawled to a door of my house, leaving my hat in the middle of the driveway, and my wife came back walking the dog and said, I wonder why David's hat is in the middle of the driveway. So, I feel that I'm fully ambulatory, I can drive. I can't imagine what it would be like to be an old person in a house in this town with nobody around. I don't know if anybody, when I was in school, when I was about 7th grade, I was very much taken with a John Greenleaf Whittier poem called Snowbound. But it must be that people without, who are living alone or with another very non-ambulatory person must feel like a prisoner all winter. And so I think the rigorous, if not draconian, enforcement of requirement that property owners clear their sidewalks of snow and ice and keep them clear is one of the most important things we can do for senior citizens in this town. And I applaud David for having taken the initiative to try to move that forward. I was just on a related subject. I saw a friend, longtime friend, the other day, hadn't seen her in a while, and I said, gee, I see your arm is in a sling. Why is your arm in a sling? She said, I tripped over a sidewalk and fell and broke my arm. So I think the issue of overhanging vegetation is not as much of a public safety issue, though it may force people to walk then in dangerous situations. But I think that the code enforcement, and it's my understanding that as to sidewalk irregularities or vegetation, that's a code enforcement officer function. It's my understanding also that it is the police who do the citation for snow and ice. But I would like to see the borough and the police department can do everything it can to keep the sidewalks of this town open and safe for persons of all age, but most particularly for more senior people, because if they go down, the consequence could be catastrophic, or they fear it will be catastrophic, and for 3 months they don't leave their homes.
I have nothing further. I can't say it anymore. David, but well stated. Thank you.
I hate to be Exhibit A, but
I do think also, just as it relates to the presentation we heard before, like certainly there's a lot of people who probably mentally would like to do it, but are incapable of cleaning. And there's so many services now, and to connect the people who need that shoveling done or ice, removed with lots of kids and or other people that exist would be.
I couldn't agree more.
If those two things go together, it makes the problem go away. I don't know how that actually happens, but
no, and it came up in committee, and not to completely digress, but because there were so many different recommendations from the Aging in Place Task Force that I think will filter through a variety of committees, but certainly connecting, like on our block, I send my 11-year-old down to shovel the elder pan, and hopefully that's happening throughout our community, but as there's gaps and different people move in and move out, people get forgotten about a bit, and new people move in, and that doesn't happen. But making those connections is critical.
And it's also, the Aging in Place Task Force mentioned the time bank idea that media already has set up, and that's exactly the kind of thing where you can draw from your account of time from that time bank and ask for shoveling of your own sidewalk because you're not able to do it.
So we're back to you. We still have a motion.
All right. All in favor of approving or advertising the motion about fines, et cetera, for snow removal, sidewalks, et cetera, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising is approved, and we'll vote on it in 2 weeks.
Correct. There's one other small note from the committee was we looked at a request from the co-op for some banners on borough light poles, which, as it turns out, is against our existing borough ordinance as it stands. So that was a fairly short point of order, and I can't do it. And then, since Mr. Cragen missed the TAC meeting, which is the Traffic Advisory Committee meeting, I figured I'd blurb that out a little bit. It meets on an as-need basis based on requests, and there were, was it 100 signatures, Jane?
So,
There was 100 some signatures for a traffic calming on Yale Avenue. So typically we try to do this as a data-driven process. So we examine the crash statistics going back the past 5 years, and we examine the speed data. We drop 2 strips, and for
right, it was basically Swarthmore Avenue to
the location,
sort
sure.
of,
So
not
yeah.
even quite far, really the 100 and 200 block.
The 100 and 200 blocks of Swarthmore Avenue, so, or of Yale Avenue, starting in Swarthmore Avenue. So we've done these over the past, I've been involved in the past 3 years, and usually we don't get a lot of data back that's favorable for traffic calming. So it's a short discussion. In this case, we did. People are flying down Yale Avenue, relatively. So the speed limit is 25. I don't have all the data in front of me, but the recommendation did come out of committee that the Public Safety Committee should take a look at some traffic calming measures for Yale Avenue. The final piece of that, I guess, would be that our borough engineer would take a look at it and provide 2 to 3 different options for traffic calming, which may or may not include a speed bump or a speed table, but there's different markings you can put on the road. We weren't sworn to, let's put speed bumps here, but that was part of, I think, the request from the petition.
When would we expect to have that?
Well, we need some authorization.
It costs some money.
His estimated cost was $5,000 just to do the study.
Just for the study?
Yeah, I don't have that, I have my phone. So.
Well, I saw your email.
Yeah.
Actually, so
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
David, remember the chief in the past, there was a point that I can't remember, the speed lines were on the road, I think, at Dickinson and or Vassar. And my recollection was that local police could only time by a stopwatch.
They are not allowed by PA state law to use a
radar. And so they have to give, I can't remember what the slack above 25 is before they can actually cite somebody.
They talked about, you want to see 10 miles over.
I'll be interested when they're available to see the data on the speeds actually recorded, because I remember the chief saying at the time that the observation when they were out there watching is that people weren't driving as fast as the people who live on the street think they're driving. And so
and I think for most of what we've done previously, David, that was the case when we did it on Park, when we did it on Dickinson. When we did it on Yale, there was a lot of people going over 35.
Right, the 85th percentile speed was 33 or 34 miles an hour, which unfortunately is very tough because it's not fast enough to ticket because it's not the 9-10 over the 25 mile an hour speed limit, which the engineer thought was appropriate for that type of speed that it was. In order so increased enforcement probably will not be effective there because there were outliers going 42, 43, but they were outliers.
Right, what was the percentage that was, you just recited?
85th percentile speed, yeah. That's the marker that you use for traffic calming.
Right, okay.
To get all
Send you the data.
Yeah, it's very, yeah. It was a bit of a surprise. Yeah, yeah.
I think we were all surprised that because normally we expected this to be a difficult conversation because people weren't going to hear what they wanted to hear. But in this case, it's kind of there. And I think there were lots of discussions with the residents as well about different types of traffic calming and the difference between stop signs and speed bumps and other ways of trying to calm traffic. So
Yeah, and
discussion.
Sorry to interrupt. So telling an engineer to spend $5,000 to study it is one option. We could carte blanche say, let's do this, and just do it, and that might cost less than $5,000.
Right.
So, but either way, we would like it to move from the Traffic Advisory Committee up to Public Safety.
So maybe that can be an agenda for, rather than, I don't quite know how to get our hands on it, but maybe if Joe Masternardi, the engineer, could come to Public Safety and talk
Well, I
about
guess
those costs.
so one question I have then is separate and apart from the $5,000 it would cost to do a study. You mentioned, Dave, one thing we could do is kind of
short circuit that and make our own determination as to what kind of traffic calming measure we'd like to put in there. But we sort of have to know what those options are. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of a couple, but I'm sure it's not exhaustive. So would the borough engineer, if he came to the meeting, be able to say, well, you could do this, you could do that? Or is that something you're... I think he's comfortable talking.
Yeah.
He talked quite a bit at our meeting, David, about different options you can do.
Yeah.
I think to an engineer's mindset, not to speak for him, they don't do anything without studying it thoroughly and studying the lay of the geography
Yeah.
before you make any type of physical changes, and very specific to probably a speed table or speed hump. There's water drainage issues, there's very specific things you need, whereas paint is paint. Like if there's marking issues that you would think would help slow people down, you can just do it.
I would love to not spend $5,000 on a study, but the truth is, if there's an accident there, something happens, and you haven't done a study, and somebody shows that it wasn't safe, makes me a little nervous to just move ahead without the study, but maybe that's unnecessary precautions.
I don't know, it's really an engineering call, you know. But the other potential risk if you don't do the study is that people who get ticketed, and I've had this happen, they go and challenge a ticket based on the fact that no study was done.
Well,
Which is a small risk. It means you've had somebody in court for a couple hours wasting time, but.
Well, it certainly makes sense to have it come to public safety, then we can start from there.
I think the residents were really appreciative of the process, the time that the committee took to chat with them. And the petition was for a speed bump, but I think they understand that there are some reservations about that. And actually, some speed bumps are specifically not advised on streets that are major emergency access routes, and that is one for the fire company and for the ambulance. So it complicates things a little bit, but there's
Sure. But there's pros and cons, and certainly the ambulances was one. The other one, and Joe mentioned it, was frequently speed bumps then become a nuisance to the people on the street because any type of landscaping truck or whatever bounces over that,
Right.
and that might be more of a problem than the speeding was. But anyway, looking at it further would be more.
We're going to put it on your agenda.
Yep. Thank you.
That's great.
And,
That's all I have.
all right, thank you, David. Next.
We are tentatively scheduled to meet the 21st at 8:30 a.m. I don't have anything open on the agenda right now, though, so that may not happen.
Subject to cancellation. All right, thanks. Next, planning and zoning, Elizabeth.
Okay. First thing I wanted to do was actually also reiterate the thanks we gave earlier to everybody on the Aging in Place Task Force. It was an amazingly comprehensive job that was done. It needs to, Borough Council will need to discuss in the beginning of 2016, you know, what to do about an implementation committee, you know, jump on this report while it's really fresh, and a lot of people are very interested in it from as can be told by the public reaction and attendance at a lot of the meetings and forums and presentations that the Aging in Place Task Force did. I also was able, completely separately from that, but it was very interesting to me. I was asked in early summer to be on the accreditation committee for the schoolhouse, which is an entity in Folsom that was mentioned in tonight's presentation. And so we spent the summer from May until September working as a committee and going over all of their programs, which are huge. It is a very, very impressive, very active, vital organization, short on space, and I think that there are very definite possibilities in terms of reaching out to them and seeing if they might be interested in making use of some space that we have in Swarthmore, community center, for instance, that type of thing, and getting our community much more tied in with that one, which is very well established and just does a huge range of activities. It's really a great place.
Am I correct, it's called a schoolhouse?
It is.
Because it's in an old school?
Yes.
Ah,
Yes.
That's what the schoolhouse.
It was the schoolhouse.
Thank you for.
And at some point, they will try to expand it, but, funds are very tight, but they're asked all the time.
What's the agency? Is it the county services for the agency, or?
They get funding from a variety of sources.
But it's an independent?
It is,
Okay.
yeah. What's that?
Started by a Swarthmorean, Arthur Weisfeld. Started it as I believe the story is he was in graduate school, maybe in social work, and he came up with this, and he's been with it ever since. Yeah, 35 years.
And then I also secondly wanted to, Greg, you came up and spoke about the institutional ordinance and said that you thought the process worked very well, and we also thank all of you for incredibly useful comments and discussions. I think both, as you said, we didn't always end up on the same page, but I think the college and we were able to express what our concerns were, and I think it laid a really good groundwork for things going forward. The main thing that'll be coming up in 2 weeks from the college's end is the final land development plan for the Whittier Space project. That has passed back in August, passed preliminary land development approval. It came in front of Planning Commission last month and is now going to be coming. Planning Commission recommended approval based on the resolution that we had passed with the preliminary, meeting all those conditions, and those conditions are reflected on the current plans now. And so that will be coming up in 2 weeks for Borough Council to vote on final approval for that project.
And I'll draft a resolution for that purpose.
Right. At the same time, we may be very busy next 2 weeks from now. Planning Commission next week is going to be having a presentation from the college that continues their preliminary land development application for the new dorm project, which people have in front of them. That has already come to Planning Commission back in a little over a month ago. And there were some outstanding studies that Planning Commission felt needed to be done, so that has now been done by the college, and will be continuing the preliminary discussions on the 16th, Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. If Planning Commission, in fact, votes to recommend approval at that meeting, I believe the college is going to be asking Borough Council to bring it to a vote for approval on the 21st. So we may have 2 things from the college to vote on land development-wise.
So Elizabeth, are there any issues that people should be thinking about?
Well, Whittier Place, the biggest issue that we discussed at Borough Council back in August for the preliminary had to do with the sidewalk issue from Whittier Place up to Elm. It was not at that point in the plans continuous. It was it stopped a short way along, and the college has now agreed and shown it on the final plans to be a continuous sidewalk going from Whittier Place on the south side of Elm up to Walnut, where there will be a crosswalk over at that intersection. There's also going to be a crosswalk from Whittier Place directly across to the north side of Elm. At that point, there's an existing, basically it's a driveway ramp that is conducive to having an accessible crosswalk come up and meet the north side sidewalk at that point. And that is going to be a painted crosswalk. The borough engineer and planning commission did not feel that there was a need at this point for any flashing lights, pedestrian crossing lights, that kind of thing. However, both planning commission and the borough engineer recommended that the next time there is any major land development in that part of the college campus, and it will be coming up with a science building. At that point, an entire traffic and vehicular and pedestrian traffic study should be made with that intersection being concentrated on in terms of safety of pedestrian crossing. And it could be that at that point, we do feel that there's more stuff going on and we need to tweak the crossing in some way. But that's what the current recommendation from both Planning Commission and the Borough Engineer is. There weren't really any other outstanding issues on that project from Planning Commission.
One of the questions in the college's engineer's response letter was a question as to whether there would be a need for development agreement. There will be, because they're doing work in the public right of way with that sidewalk. So we need to hold an escrow for that too, to ensure it gets complete.
Okay.
So that'll just be one of the conditions.
Yeah, that'll be
right.
In the new resolution.
Yeah.
Right. And I assume, so the resolution will simply refer to
The prior resolution.
the prior resolution and any current list of comments from the borough engineer, which is basically what the planning commission referred to.
Right.
Okay.
Then they'll spell out the need for development agreement also.
Right. Yep.
All right, so those will be set for vote next meeting, 2 weeks hence.
Yep. And as will be a vote on the institutional zoning ordinance, which, again, hopefully the rest of the council has read. Have any questions?
No,
Please let me know. Please let me know. The Planning and Zoning Committee will not be meeting on December 22nd.
Your last chance.
It is my last chance. I can pass on that
Building
one.
your time.
All right.
That's it.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. Next, public safety. David.
Right, so I wasn't originally planning to have a committee meeting this month on December 15th. However, if it would be right to consider the traffic calming issues this month as opposed to January, we could do that. I'm kind of looking to you, Dave, and to Jane to see whether...
We didn't commit for you, David?
We did not come in, and the group was, looking at Rick, who's also there, I mean, I don't know that they expected
No,
us to
I'm not
meet
sure you're
it.
going to get
I
the
think
engineer.
All right, so we'll meet in January then, and the committee will meet in January. And the other thing I wanted to mention in that regard is there will be another issue to discuss relating to a significant, not gigantic, but a significant and unexpected expense, or a couple of expenses that the fire company encountered. I think the committee is going to take a look at those as well to see whether or not it would be appropriate for the borough to help out with those. So that would also be on the January agenda, which means we won't meet this month, but the committee will meet in January. Thank you, Ralph. That's all.
All right, thank you, David. Public Works, David.
At our next meeting, we will have for action a resolution setting recycling regulations for the year 2016. A copy of that has been provided to us. That apart, I do not expect that the Public Works, Parks, and Recreation Committee will meet this month.
All right, thank you. And Jane, I have this agreement with Knight Brothers. This was already approved. This
Yeah,
is
it's just
my
for signature. Oh, you know, I
Just wanted to make sure.
No, I have something else for you to sign too. Nothing to do.
But not an agenda item.
Correct.
All right, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Ralph. I think today was a very interesting time for us. There were a lot of kind of interconnected issues that came up, and we sort of talked about the kind of same basic issue from several different points of view, which I thought was kind of very interesting. I wanted to also thank the Aging in Place Task Force. I mean, I think they did an amazing amount of effort and thought and really sort of careful work, and it's an impressive document that I think we're going to be talking about for quite some time, without you two. But although you're welcome to come back and throw your 2 cents. Also, you know, it touched on so many things. Like the pedestrian bicycle task force. There are elements from that sort of go hand in glove with this kind of thing. There are several other recommendations that were made in the report, which essentially we're already acting on. We're doing, maybe we came at it from a different point of view, but the things like the crossings on Yale Avenue, at Rutgers, and at Harvard, and just the general idea of how there's a basic understanding that we want to be able to walk around town, and that we want to try to get across that idea that pedestrians are important, and they do have the right of way over cars in those crosswalks and things like that, where people still don't seem to get that or understand that, as we see. So I'm optimistic for. I think this has been a very interesting year for us overall, and I can talk more about that in 2 weeks on our swan song. But basically, not to sound like a broken record, you've heard me say this a million times, but the heart and soul of the borough are volunteers, and it's really, everybody. It's you guys, it's the fire department, it's the people on the task force, it's all the people. There's so many of them you can't even begin to list them all, but it's people who take time out of their day, their busy lives, to dedicate some portion of that to really fostering this idea of community. It makes a place that we all want to live in. We can't do it without the volunteers, and I can't say that enough.
Well, thank you for those comments. It's true, that's the strength of this community. So many people who have talents and are willing to give them for the public good. With that, we have a second opportunity for public comment, this being our work session. Any member of the public wish to offer any comment? Hearing none. Public comment is again closed. Jane, any comments from the borough manager?
I mentioned to Dave Murphy that I got an email earlier this week from the director of the Community Arts Center with an interest in holding the Fine Arts Festival in Swarthmore again next year, which I thought was sort of exciting, and Marty thought was sort of exciting as well. They wanted some flexibility as to the location Some people loved Myers Avenue, some people, I guess, had some issues with Myers Avenue, both for visibility and the train going by. And then there was some discussion of whether the train was going quickly because it was heading into Philadelphia quickly to see the Pope.
People
Or
Express.
it was the Pope Express, right, it was a little bit different than a normal day, that's why it was here. So they have asked for an opportunity to use Park Avenue, to close Park Avenue. I can either let them know that that is a possibility, or it can go to committee. They would like to know sooner rather than later, because they start publicizing the event, obviously not that sooner, because they didn't know until, I guess, July last year.
I think it's a great idea, but I don't know if there's objections.
I mean, when they were in media, they closed State Street.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's very out there in the.
We'll get the agreement like we did last time, I knew that, but.
But also that brings up the fact that by the time that comes around, Swarthmore Central Park will essentially be finished.
Well, right,
And so we'll have, the amphitheater will be right there off of Park.
I thought it would be great, yeah.
It's the face of our town rather than the
Right.
back
And
door.
we understand, the businesses are open that day, so we don't want the entire town closed down, that would be much, but I'd be.
But it's a traffic drive for the businesses.
Right, so,
It's
not as,
So
yeah.
it sounds like there is a consensus. I don't hear
I
any
can just move ahead and let them know.
dissenting voices.
I actually wanted to add one thing, and that is that, we sort of automatically think of park, but it's actually some of our businesses on Station Square East, which have, I think, been feeling a little bit neglected in terms of events. And I know that that may be a more difficult street to close off, but if we could at least perhaps position the arts fair to
kind of move people around
move
there.
around as much as possible, because the inn will be up and running by the time they're there. It would be great to really get this to be, something that involves our full downtown.
Right. I think right off the bat, they did bring in Marty as a town, and so he definitely has the ear of the merchant, so
Right.
we can kind of work with that as long as everyone's on board.
I would think the only, not having thought about this at all, if you close that, both park and that, you cut off, during the period of it, vehicular access to the station platform.
Oh, so we don't worry.
Yeah, but we can take all those into, I'm sure we can take all
It gets
those
done
into
for the fun fair.
I was going to say, similar to the
That's
fun
right.
fair.
And that's all I have, except for a personnel matter to discuss in executive session.
All right, Bob, anything from the solicitor?
No, thank you, nothing.
All right, we do have a personnel matter to discuss. Any other business to come before council before we adjourn into executive session?
I move we go into executive session.
Second.